Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the complexities of history, science, or strategy, distill the key insights from your source material, and give you the knowledge you need to be genuinely well-informed. Today we are focusing on a story where reality met assumption and, well, the assumption won, at least for a few absolutely critical hours.
It's a fascinating case study.
We're diving into what is, for me, the absolute core paradox of the Second World War. The scene is June 6, 1944. Dawn is breaking over the beaches of Normandy.
Right.
And we all know the incredible scale of this invasion. You've got 156,000 Allied soldiers landing across 5 beaches, supported by thousands of aircraft and the largest naval armada ever assembled. It's monumental.
But deep in the forests of East Prussia, in this, isolated concrete bunker complex called the Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler is sound asleep.
And that sleeping fear is just the perfect symbol of the German paralysis that defined that entire day, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you have field reports just flooding into the high command paratroopers, confirmed behind Utah and Omaha, heavy naval bombardment shaking the coastal defenses, a continuous line of ships stretching to the horizon.
All the signs are there.
All of them. Yet the collective decision is made. Do not wake the Führer. Do not move the reserves.
That hesitation, that fundamental belief that all the noise in Normandy was just a distracting racket. That's our mission today.
Exactly.
We're analyzing the complete operational and psychological failure of the German high command to respond effectively to D-Day. And the fascinating part of this story, the part that our sources just hammer home, is that this paralysis was orchestrated entirely by a massive, meticulously planned intelligence deception campaign.
And it all centered on one single double agent.
One man.
We are focusing on how a fixed, deeply comforting belief, a strategic bias that was cultivated over months, overcame the screaming, bloody reality that was unfolding on the beaches of France.
By the time Hitler finally opened his eyes, the war was, in many ways, already lost.
The lie that won the war had already sealed the fate of the Third Reich. Yes.
Okay, so let's get right to the immediate critical failure point, because this is where the strategic implications are just. They're so profound for you to grasp.
Right.
Why did the strongest German force in the West, the 15th Army, I mean, this is a monumental force of 19 divisions, over 150,000 experienced men, why did it stand completely idle, dug in along the coast, 200 miles away from where they were so desperately needed?
To understand that failure, you have to place yourself inside the dim, stifling atmosphere of the Wolf's Lair on the morning of June 6th.
Right. It's not just a headquarters.
No, it wasn't. It was an echo chamber of confirmation bias, completely isolated from the front lines. The central operations room was just dominated by these massive strategic maps of France.
And you've got the pins, right? The blue and the red.
Exactly. Every German division marked in blue, every Allied threat in red. And as the hours passed that morning, the map must have become this chaotic jumble of red pins just spreading across Normandy.
And reports are coming in
Constantly. Despite the crackling radio traffic delivering increasingly panicked field reports, confirming 5 invasion beaches, reporting overwhelming air superiority, requesting immediate armored support, the decision-making machinery just froze.
So what was the thinking? Why freeze?
The initial blindness was institutional. It was rooted in German military doctrine. For months, their intelligence experts had drilled into the high command the concept of the Schwerpunkt, the center of gravity, the decisive blow.
Yeah.
They reasoned that the genuine invasion, the real effort, had to come at Pas-de-Calais, specifically around the port of Calais.
And what made Calais so irresistible to the German military mind? Why there?
Well, a few things, which is really why the lie was so effective. First, it's simple geography. Calais is the narrowest point of the English Channel.
The shortest route.
The shortest, quickest route for a large-scale amphibious landing. Second, you have strategic proximity. A landing force at Calais is only about 180 miles from the German industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley.
So it's a direct threat to their war machine.
A direct threat. And third, and this is crucial, military necessity. They had already placed many of their crucial V-weapon launch sites, the V-1 and V-2 rockets, in the Pas-de-Calais area.
So protecting those was paramount.
It was paramount to protecting the Reich homeland itself. Therefore, any massive invasion must be aimed there. Normandy, by that very definition, had to be a diversion.
So they had convinced themselves that Allied strategic thinking perfectly mirrored their own.
Exactly. Any evidence to the contrary was instantly suspect.
They were looking for the logical military strike.
Ignoring the fact that the Allies had enough logistical muscle to just ignore the logical approach and land where the defenses were weaker. The moment the first reports arrived from Normandy, they were immediately filtered through this doctrinal lens. Diversion. Keep the reserves ready for the real attack.
So when Hitler finally enters the command room, sometime after 10:00 a.m., this fatal process plays out in real time.
It does. Our sources confirm he looked at the map, saw the pins spreading across Normandy, but his eyes almost automatically drifted north to Calais.
Where the 15th Army stood.
Where the 15th Army stood. And that army was not just any force, it was the strategic reserve of the West. It included several elite panzer divisions, motorized infantry, some of the best trained defensive troops they had. It was intentionally kept cohesive and powerful for the one crucial counterstrike they expected at Calais.
And there it stood.
Perfectly positioned, completely idle.
So his first action wasn't to order reinforcements to Normandy.
No, it was to confirm the continued threat at Calais. He needed reassurance that his central belief, his core assumption, was correct.
And did he get it?
He got it immediately. The source notes that an intelligence officer stepped forward and just reinforced the belief that was already comfortable. Patton's army hasn't moved. Calais is still the target.
And Hitler.
Hitler nodded. That single moment, confirmed by a German officer and backed by months of false intelligence, it solidified the deadly policy. It was a choice to validate comfort over confronting danger.
And this trust factor here is absolutely central. Why did Hitler and the high command trust this information so implicitly?
Because they trusted one man. A single Spanish double agent codenamed Garbo by the Allies and Alaric by the Germans.
Garbo's reports were considered the gold standard.
Absolutely. For 2 solid years, his intelligence had been flawless, detailed, and unshakable in its central assertion that the main Allied invasion force General George Patton's fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, was massing across southeastern England, aiming for Pas-de-Calais.
He was Hitler's crown jewel of intelligence.
He was a supposedly fiercely loyal Spanish businessman, Juan Pujol Garcia, who the Germans believed was running this unparalleled network of agents from dock workers in Liverpool to clerks inside the War Office. His credibility was absolute.
And his information was a direct confirmation of German strategic necessity.
It was. And the devastating cost of this hesitation, this misplaced trust, was immediately apparent in the chain of command. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the commander of Army Group B, the man most responsible for the Atlantic Wall defenses, he was away.
He was visiting his wife for her birthday.
Visiting his wife in Germany for her birthday, confident that the weather conditions made a major invasion impossible that morning. And crucially, trusting that he would be notified in advance if the real invasion at Calais was coming.
You just can't overstate the symbolic failure of Rommel being away.
Yeah.
His authority was key to releasing the armored reserves immediately.
It was. In his absence, Field Marshal Rundstedt, the commander-in-chief in the West, he delayed any independent response. He was waiting for explicit orders from Hitler's headquarters, which was, of course, paralyzed by its own dogma.
And Hitler slept.
By the time they overcame their hesitation, the critical window to crush the landings on the beaches was gone.
And Garbo made sure that window was slammed shut.
He did. He had sent a final calculated message the night before, on June 5th, reinforcing the entire deception. Normandy is the diversion. Under no circumstances move the 15th Army reserves away from Calais.
And they obeyed.
They obeyed that order implicitly, and as the documents show, in that single act of strategic obedience, they signed the death warrant of the entire Western Front.
It's an incredible historical pivot point. The decision to do nothing was the result of perfect deception, meeting a perfect yet flawed German preconception about how the war should be fought.
That's it. Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this further, because the argument that Normandy was just a feint, it just collapses completely when you look at the sheer, overwhelming physical scale of the Allied commitment, even just in the first 12 hours.
Right.
By noon on June 6th, the reports coming in were so massive that they should have broken through any intelligence doctrine, no matter how trusted the source was. Yet the high command remained strategically locked down.
That's the key analytical point here. The numbers told a story that mathematically contradicted the notion of a mere diversion. They were facing a logistical effort that spoke not just of commitment, but of overwhelming national dedication to this one goal.
Let's break down the sheer scale of the assault just in those first 12 hours.
Yeah.
The total Allied forces put ashore were 156,000 men.
156,000. This is not a raid. This is an army.
An army. And looking closer at the individual sectors, it just emphasizes the depth of this commitment. I mean, Take Omaha Beach.
Right, which became infamous for its casualty rates.
Exactly. Despite intense resistance and nearly 2,400 casualties in the first wave, the Americans pressed on until 34,000 troops were ashore. They solidified their hold on the crucial bluffs by the end of the day.
And meanwhile, at Utah Beach, 23,000 troops landed successfully, immediately linking up with the American airborne divisions that had dropped behind the lines.
And on the eastern flank, you have the British and Canadian forces 75,000 strong across Gold, Juno, and sword-securing vital road networks, establishing bridgeheads almost instantly.
And you have to factor in the paratroopers. The 23,000 airborne troops that had captured bridges and blocked critical roads, further slowing any potential German counter-response.
So what truly, in your view, eliminates the possibility of this being a feint?
It's the logistical tail. The sources detail 7,000 vessels offshore. Think about that number for a moment. This wasn't just a handful of landing craft. This was a floating city carrying 195,700 total personnel, from engineers and medics to supply crews.
And the air cover, most critically, the air cover.
11,590 aircraft providing continuous air cover. That means for every single minute of that invasion, German forces were under the watch or the attack of Allied planes. A scale of air operations that the Luftwaffe simply couldn't touch.
So the sheer logistical footprint is what stands out.
It is. Mobilizing 7,000 vessels and over 11,000 aircraft requires months of intricate strategic planning, resource dedication, and industrial output that you do not, under any circumstances, expend on a secondary front.
It screams main attack.
It screams main attack in every language of military strategy. Yet, the German 15th Army, the main strategic reserve, still waited for the real show. Their fixed belief in the deception was more powerful than the physical evidence visible on their own maps.
It just seems almost too unbelievable that professional commanders could dismiss physical evidence on that scale. What did they risk internally by accepting Garbo's word over their own operational reports?
They risked having to admit that they had fundamentally misjudged the enemy's capacity and intentions. It was easier, it was more comfortable to trust the deception narrative. Because if Normandy was the main attack, it meant the entire structure of the Western defense, the allocation of their best resources, the placement of their strategic reserves. It meant all of it was wrong.
And Garbo gave them the excuse they needed.
He provided the excuse they needed to delay confronting that terrifying truth.
And it wasn't just the immediate landings they ignored. Doubt began to creep in among some junior officers in the operations rooms as the scope became clear.
But again, the immediate crushing retort was, Patton has not moved. His entire army group is still in England, according to our most trusted source.
They had a fixed idea.
A fixed idea? And any contradictory evidence, even hard data, was immediately filtered through the lens of that idea. This is reinforced by a comparative analysis of Allied bombing targets over the 3 months prior to D-Day, data which was available to the German command.
So the decoded intelligence report arriving that morning.
Yeah.
It must have been damning in hindsight.
Oh, it was. If the main attack was Calais, the bombing should have focused on the infrastructure supporting Calais, right?
Right. Makes sense.
But the reality was the exact opposite. Let's compare the focus of Allied air power. Calais railway hubs suffered only 12 major strikes during that build-up period.
12. Okay. And Normandy.
37 major strikes on railway hubs in the same period.
That's a huge difference.
Huge. Furthermore, the systematic destruction of the Seine River crossing points was relentless. 18 out of 24 major bridges had been destroyed.
So the Allies weren't just bombing, they were surgically isolating the entire region of Normandy. Why is the destruction of the Seine bridges so critical to this narrative?
Because the Seine River essentially forms a massive moat. It separates the Normandy region from the rest of France and from the crucial German reserves, including the 15th Army at Calais.
So the bridges are the arteries.
They're the arteries of communication and transport. The systematic devastation of those bridges was explicitly designed to paralyze German counter-movement after the landings.
In other words, even if the 15th Army had been given the order to move south on June 6th, the Allies had already ensured their movement would be agonizingly slow and dangerous.
Precisely. This pattern of logistical devastation screamed, "We are landing in Normandy and we want to ensure you cannot bring your best forces to bear." Yet the High Command chose to interpret the surgical operational preparation as merely part of the deception, making the decoy look real, just as Garbo had reported.
It's just astonishing. They saw the physical evidence of preparation for the main attack, but dismissed it entirely because of a lie that confirmed their biases.
And the data gets even worse when you look at the fundamental underlying capacity mismatch between the warring sides.
The logistics check, the industrial output.
Exactly. The comparison of Allied versus German industrial output during the build-up months of 1944 paints a truly sobering picture of why the deception was almost redundant.
What are we talking about here?
The Allies had the industrial capacity to land anywhere on any scale they chose. The disparity is immense. For example, Allied production figures show 11,000 Sherman tanks produced in the buildup period compared to Germany's 3,200 Panzers.
Wow. And in the air.
In the air, the Allies produced 27,000 aircraft against Germany's 9,500.
But the figures that are most relevant to an amphibious invasion are transport and mobility, right?
That's the key. Allied forces produced 31,000 specialized landing craft. And critically, the Allies produced 170,000 trucks, compared to Germany's 26,000 trucks.
170,000.
That truck figure is devastating. In modern terms, that's the difference between having a state-of-the-art, fully flexible global supply chain and relying on a few fragmented regional depots. The Allies had the internal mobility to move millions of tons of supplies and men quickly once ashore.
And the Wehrmacht.
By 1944, the Wehrmacht was heavily reliant on horses and foot traffic outside of their dedicated armored divisions.
So if the German commanders already had these logistics figures, wouldn't that data alone have screamed a main attack? Wouldn't that show them they were simply outmatched? Why did they still need Garbo's confirmation?
Because of the psychological barrier. Admitting that the enemy has 5 times your production capacity and limitless transport means you have lost the strategic initiative entirely. It forces you to rethink every single assumption about defense.
And Garbo offered them a narrative of hope.
Exactly. He offered them hope that the Allies would still choose the logical, short path at Calais, giving Germany a chance for a decisive counterstroke. They chose the comfortable, familiar fantasy over the terrifying, complex reality.
Our sources have this devastating quote from a German general who reviewed those figures. They didn't need to deceive us. They could have landed anywhere.
That quote just perfectly encapsulates the sheer material reality they were up against. The industrial capacity alone screamed total war. Yet one man's lie, confirming their strategic comfort, kept 150,000 of their best men out of the fight for 7 crucial weeks.
Which sets the stage for the disastrous tactical outcome. The strategic paralysis of the High Command was complete, and here's where it's really interesting. Even when the High Command finally overcame its initial indecision and ordered action, the German response was fatally crippled.
Fatally crippled by the very air supremacy that the Allies had established because of that initial delay.
The delay ensured that every unit released into the fight faced insurmountable odds.
And the story of the Panzerlehr Division is the perfect, tragic example of this operational failure. It demonstrates the brutal reality of fighting without air cover.
So the Panzerlehr was one of the Wehrmacht's premier armored divisions, right?
Right.
Equipped with some of the best tanks Germany had.
A key strategic reserve, poised to move quickly. And they finally received their mobilization order at 14:30 on the afternoon of June 6th.
And their operational plan? How long should it have taken them to get to the front?
It indicated they should have been able to cover the 100-plus miles to the Normandy front in about 18 hours.
18 hours.
If that timeline had been met, they would have been reinforcing the German lines by the afternoon of June 7th, potentially disrupting the American bridgehead at Omaha, Utah, before it could solidify.
But their actual arrival was June 9th, 3 full days late. What caused that catastrophic delay?
It was the relentless, total Allied air supremacy. The Allies, knowing that time was everything, employed a strategy of continuous interdiction. Every road was bombed, every railroad destroyed, every known German concentration spot was targeted relentlessly.
Can you elaborate on what that journey was like for the men and tanks of the Panzerlehr? I mean, it can't have been a simple drive.
Far from it. That 18-hour journey turned into 72 hours of agonizing, dangerous movement. Imagine the scene. Armored columns, meant to move swiftly, forced to halt every time they heard the distant roar of a reconnaissance plane.
So they could only travel at night.
Mostly at night, moving slowly through thick forests and under heavy camouflage, constantly worried that the thin canopy wouldn't fool the Allied fighter bombers.
And the sources describe the psychological strain of that.
Oh, absolutely. The soldiers were exhausted before they even reached the battlefield. They were constantly under the threat of attack from above, a threat they could barely fight back against, since the Luftwaffe was just nowhere to be seen.
And the consequence was catastrophic attrition before the battle was even joined.
It was. The division started the journey with 182 tanks, including Panthers and specialized armored vehicles. By the time they finally arrived on the front line near the fighting, only 134 were operational.
That is nearly 50 tanks destroyed or disabled. A quarter of their fighting strength gone, just because they were moving on a contested road.
It's a sobering statistic, isn't it? These were tanks designed to fight other tanks and infantry, and they were destroyed by aircraft before ever seeing a single Allied soldier on the ground. This emphasizes that even if Hitler had woken up earlier, the delay caused by the deception meant that Allied air power had already locked down the entire battlefield.
The battle had already been decided by the air.
By the air, not by the infantry.
And meanwhile, as this slow-motion operational disaster unfolded, Rommel, who rushed back from his wife's birthday trip and was attempting to salvage the situation, he sent an urgent message to the Wolf's Lair at 1600 hours that afternoon.
An urgent priority message. It was clear, devoid of political niceties, and profoundly prophetic, he stated. If the enemy once gets a firm footing on land, our position will be catastrophic. We must throw them back into the sea before nightfall.
He understood. He saw exactly what was happening.
He understood the criticality of the first 48 hours, but what's devastating about that message is the timing and the context in which it was received.
Right.
By the time it reached the Wolf's Lair and was processed through the paralyzed command structure, it was already past nightfall in Normandy. The Allies were firmly ashore, they had established beachheads, and the opportunity Rommel desperately warned about, the chance to achieve a decisive counterstroke, was permanently closed.
And his realistic assessment flew directly in the face of the comfortable deception Garbo was still confirming.
Exactly. Which leads to the final, agonizing command vacuum that evening as the situation devolved.
Hitler, finally forced to confront the disaster, says, "Release the reserves."
But when the officers around him asked the crucial question, "Which reserves, mein Führer, to Normandy or to Calais?" he is silent.
That silence speaks volumes.
It does. He did not answer because the cognitive dilemma was too great. To commit the crucial 15th Army Reserves to Normandy would be to concede, publicly and strategically, that the entire High Command had been utterly, catastrophically fooled by a chicken farmer's lies.
But to hold them at Calais risked losing the war entirely.
Which he still clung to as the potential main target. It risked losing the war in France by ignoring the active, ongoing battle. That psychological moment, that inability to commit fully to the truth or the lie, is the instant the entire strategic picture just crumbled.
The paralysis was absolute, built on a lie they had desperately needed to believe.
Yes.
The immediate chaos of June 6th then gave way to this dreadful realization 3 days later. For June 9th, 1944, the Allies had not been pushed back even an inch. In fact, the beachheads were linking up.
A continuous front, 50 miles wide, 10 miles deep in places. The invasion had expanded.
Yet the massive 15th Army is still in the north, guarding the empty coast of Pas-de-Calais. So let's trace how the intelligence picture finally broke.
The process of self-delusion could only last as long as the hard evidence could be rationalized. And the silence in the Reich Chancellery changed from nervous hope to horrified realization on June 9th.
What was the trigger?
The single domino that finally toppled the entire edifice of belief wasn't a massive battle report, but a mundane, routine, decoded intercept of British radio traffic.
Just routine supply coordination. But it contained one small, absolutely lethal detail.
General Patton's name was mentioned in the past tense. The message indicated he was previously assigned, no longer attached to the unit they were tracking in southeast England.
And the significance of that was immediate.
Immediate and terrifying. The officer who delivered the report understood instantly. They had tracked Patton, the most feared, most aggressive, most celebrated tank commander of the Allies, for months as the commander of Fusek.
1st U.S. Army Group.
Now, a low-level supply message confirmed he wasn't there. It meant Fusek was not moving. And if Fusek was not moving...
Fusek did not exist.
It didn't exist. The realization must have been gut-wrenching. Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group, Fusek, the mighty force they had dedicated their best reserves to counter, was, in their intelligence chief's horrified words, never real.
The Ghost Army revelation. It's one of the most masterful feats of deception in military history.
All those resources, all that attention, all that strategic planning had been dedicated to fighting phantoms, the tanks the Germans had tracked in Kent.
It's inflatable.
Elaborate, inflatable rubber decoys, the massive concentrations of landing craft at Dover and the mouth of the Thames.
Plywood and canvas.
Plywood, canvas, and strategically placed smoke generators.
And the most sophisticated part of the deception was the soundscape. The constant convincing radio traffic they had monitored for months, the one thing Garbo continually reported on.
It was revealed to be a show. It was a unit of actors and radio operators reading meticulously scripted, believable military chatter to make the airwaves sound busy and regimented, simulating the movements of hundreds of thousands of men.
So once the physical reality of the fake army was established, the internal reckoning began.
It did. Our sources detail a devastating meeting where an intelligence analyst finally spoke up, forced to provide the cold, hard numbers of their failure.
And the analysts laid out their dependence on Garbo.
He did. Garbo had sent 47 reports between January and June 1944. Every single one confirmed Calais as the primary target. He cited independent sources, a wealthy Portuguese businessman, a Welsh fascist, a clerk in the Foreign Office.
But then came the admission that defined the failure of German counterintelligence.
The killer line. We never verified a single source. We never physically met any of them. We only had Garbo's word, and we chose to believe it.
Their intelligence became dependent on a single, isolated, and highly motivated point of failure.
And that dependence was compounded by their own operational limitations. Allied air superiority had wiped out all German reconnaissance flights over England months earlier. When observation fails, you become entirely dependent on reports.
And if one report tells you exactly what you want to hear.
Critical thinking dies immediately.
And the final layer of calculated deception is just a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. Garbo's last crucial message, the one that paralyzed the 15th Army, was sent at 3:00 a.m. on June 5th.
Reinforcing the Calais objective, labeling Normandy a diversion.
But it was received and decoded at 8 a.m., 5 crucial hours late.
The reason was mundane but devastating. Nobody was on duty to decode classified messages at 3:00 in the morning in Berlin.
And the genius move Garbo actually complained about this delay in his next message on June 6th.
He did. He feigned this furious loyalty, stressing that if they had acted faster on his 3-point AM warning, they could have crushed the diversion landing and saved the Reich embarrassment.
And Berlin.
Berlin, facing the truth of their defeat, didn't question the delay or the source. They responded with immediate, sincere gratitude for his warning and, almost impossibly, awarded him the Iron Cross.
The depth of the deception was total. It secured the 15th Army for days longer than necessary.
It did.
Which brings us to the man himself, Juan Pujol Garcia. It's hard to imagine a less likely candidate for the most valuable double agent of the war.
His profile is extraordinary. He was a disgruntled Spanish chicken farmer and former hotel manager with zero military or intelligence experience.
His motivations were purely ideological.
Purely anti-fascist and anti-communist. But fundamentally, he just wanted to fight Nazism. He actually offered his services to the Allies first, 3 separate times in 1941 and 42.
And they rejected him.
They rejected him as unreliable and unqualified.
Imagine that initial rejection. So he went to the Germans instead.
And they accepted him immediately, giving him the codename Arabelle. They were desperate for sources in England.
And then he proceeded to invent an entire fictional network out of thin air.
That's right. He manufactured 27 sub-agents, all fictional characters, each with their own backstory, motivation, and distinct reporting style.
Like who?
Oh, there's a Portuguese businessman running a network of dock workers in Liverpool, a fiercely anti-Semitic Welsh fascist in Swansea, a Venezuelan student in Glasgow, and even a disgruntled American GI who supplied troop numbers.
And his source material wasn't espionage. It was sheer creative writing mixed with readily available information.
He wrote his initial reports from Lisbon, using a simple travel guide of England, old railway timetables, and current magazines. He invented troop movements, imagined convoy sightings, and described military bases that simply didn't exist, all with meticulous, plausible detail.
And Berlin loved him.
Loved him, paid him handsomely, and promoted him continuously. When British intelligence finally figured out that the Germans were receiving these incredible, highly accurate reports from a total fantasist operating from Portugal, they didn't arrest him. They immediately brought him to London, gave him the codename Garbo, and turned him into the essential weapon of Operation Fortitude.
And the British methodology for building Garbo's credibility into an untouchable, unimpeachable source is just textbook espionage.
It is, delivered in 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 was truth delayed. The goal was to give Garbo credibility, but always provide an excuse why he couldn't stop the attacks.
Like with the North Africa invasion.
Exactly. In 1943, Garbo reported the invasion. Due to a calculated transmission delay fabrication, Berlin received the message after the landings had begun. It made the report seem accurate, but just late enough to excuse their lack of preparation. Hitler personally commended him for it.
Credibility established.
Credibility established. Phase 2 was dependency cultivated. For 18 months leading up to D-Day, Garbo sent this steady stream of intelligence. Some true, some slightly off, all highly plausible and detailed, mixing genuine minor details with massive fabricated strategic lies.
His network grew to 27 agents.
And his reports became required reading at the highest levels of the German Abwehr. This created dependency. The Abwehr stopped questioning him and started routing all conflicting intelligence through Garbo's reports to see if they correlated.
Which brings us to Phase 3.
Exploitation, fueled by bias. By 1944, German intelligence didn't just trust Garbo. They needed him. Their own reconnaissance was gone due to Allied air superiority, so they couldn't independently verify anything. Garbo was all they had left.
So when he said Calais, they believed Calais.
They believed it not because the evidence supported it, but because he was the only source confirming the comfortable lie they wanted to believe. He provided the certainty that allowed strategic paralysis.
So if we pull back now, what does this initial paralysis, a direct result of Garbo's success, mean for the broader Western Front? Let's connect this single delayed decision on June 6 to the ultimate strategic collapse of the Reich in the West.
The strategic cost of keeping the 15th Army idle is just staggering, and it dictates the entire shape of the war that followed.
This was 150,000 men.
150,000 men, the strongest defensive and most heavily motorized force in Western Europe. They remained entrenched, waiting for the Ghost Army at Pas-de-Calais until July 25th, 7 full weeks after D-Day.
7 weeks. By the time they were finally released and ordered south to reinforce the collapsing Normandy front, the strategic reality had completely changed.
Completely. The Allies had landed over 1 million men, established a continuous front 60 miles wide, and most critically captured Cherbourg and its vital deepwater port, ensuring the sustainability of their logistical chain.
The window to push the Allies back into the sea was closed forever.
Forever. The presence of the 15th Army on June 6th, 7th, or 8th would have fundamentally altered the balance of forces, potentially pushing the Allies back to the beaches. By late July, their deployment was merely an effort to plug holes in an already breached dam. They were fighting a rearguard action, not a strategic defense.
And the paralysis went deeper than just troop placement. It absolutely destroyed German logistical planning.
It created a horrific logistical nightmare based on this continued paralyzing fear of the real Calais invasion. Rommel in Normandy was begging for immediate reinforcements, fuel, supplies for the fierce fighting he was engaged in.
But he received only fractions of what he needed.
Because the war planners in Berlin could not bring themselves to release them. Resources, fuel, vital tank rounds, replacement soldiers, bridging equipment were systematically held back.
For Patton's Phantom Army.
They had to be ready for Patton's Phantom Army. The High Command couldn't release the necessary resources to win the active battle in Normandy because they were terrified of being unprepared for the supposedly real invasion that might happen tomorrow. This warped, paranoid logistical planning guaranteed failure on the actual front line.
And the air power implications were equally profound, linking back to our earlier point about the Panzerlehr Division.
The Luftwaffe held back reserves, waiting to commit fully against Patton's ghost invasion force crossing the narrow channel. This self-imposed waiting game allowed Allied fighters and bombers to establish total, unassailable air dominance over Normandy by the time the Luftwaffe was finally committed.
It was too late.
It was too late to contest the skies, ensuring that German ground reinforcements would continue to be crippled from above until the end of the war in the West.
And perhaps the most corrosive effect of the deception was psychological, the fractured command structure.
Oh, absolutely. The success of Operation Fortitude caused deep instability and internal warfare within the German leadership. Rommel argued urgently for a focused counterattack in Normandy, demanding the release of the 15th Army.
Rundstedt urged caution.
He urged caution, believing the enemy's main thrust was still to come. And Hitler, constantly wavering between the two, trusted no one and committed fully to nothing.
Garbo's success meant that no one in the High Command trusted their own judgment or their own intelligence estimates anymore.
Exactly. The resulting confusion and internal bickering ensured that no consistent, decisive operational plan could be executed during the critical period of June and July. The war was being lost in their minds before it was lost on the battlefield.
An intelligence officer interviewed after the war summarized this specific failure of cognitive judgment with a powerful quote that truly defines the entire operation.
We didn't lose because we were deceived. We lost because we wanted to be deceived. Garbo told us what we already believed, and we built our entire strategy around a fantasy.
That is the ultimate chilling lesson. The deception wasn't just a clever trick. The trap was the comfort that lie offered. It confirmed their strategic biases and allowed them to delay a frightening confrontation with reality.
They refused to see the truth, even as it was actively killing their army in Normandy. And by August 1944, the inevitable strategic collapse occurred.
The 15th Army finally engages.
When finally released in late July, they engaged in furious but desperate fighting. They were shattered in weeks in the hedge and forests of France, fighting a numerically superior enemy that was fully supplied and organized.
150,000 men gone.
Gone, not because they lacked courage, but because they fought 7 weeks too late.
And the human cost of the command structure was equally immense. Rommel, who had provided the accurate assessment and argued most fiercely for the release of the 15th Army.
He was implicated in the July plot against Hitler just weeks later and was forced to commit suicide in October 1944. Rundstedt was dismissed, reinstated, and then dismissed again, his authority irrevocably broken.
And Hitler retreated deeper into his bunker,
Issuing orders to divisions that no longer existed and reinforcing the belief systems that had already cost him the West. The reality of the war had slipped away from the German command entirely, replaced by paranoid suspicion and strategic fantasy.
It is truly incredible to review the fate of the man who arguably won the Western campaign without ever firing a shot, Juan Pujol Garcia, known as Garbo.
His cunning was monumental, right up to the very moment his utility was maximized. On June 9th, the very same day Hitler was beginning to grasp the horrifying truth that Husag was fake.
Garbo sent another message.
He sent yet another message to his German handlers, expressing his deep regret for the 5-hour delay in his June 5th warning, insisting that if they had acted faster, the Normandy diversion could have been crushed.
And Berlin, utterly bamboozled, swallowed it hook, line, and sinker.
They did. They responded with sincere gratitude, praising his commitment, and formally awarded him the Iron Cross.
That is the punchline of history, isn't it?
And it is singular. Juan Pujol Garcia is the only known person in history to be decorated by both sides, receiving the Iron Cross from Berlin and the MBE, member of the Order of the British Empire from King George VI in the same war, for his actions in the same operation.
Rewarded by his enemies for fooling them, and rewarded by his allies for winning the war.
After 1945, he just disappeared completely. Faked his own death, lived quietly in Venezuela, raised a family, until the 1980s when historians finally tracked him down.
And when he was interviewed near the end of his life and asked how he felt about deceiving an entire nation,
he offered a profound final assessment. He paused, reflecting on the scale of the deceit, and said simply, "I didn't deceive them, they deceived themselves. I just let them."
That one line summarizes this entire deep dive. Wars are not only won with guns and tanks and ships, they are won with belief. And on June 6, 1944, Germany believed the wrong thing, not because the deception was perfect, but because the lie was comfortable.
It reinforced their pre-existing strategic biases and fears. And this raises an important question for you, the listener. The ultimate operational lesson of D-Day is that the most dangerous enemy is not the one at the gates. It's the one inside your own mind. The profound need to confirm what you already assume to be true, regardless of the physical evidence around you.
We see this cognitive bias everywhere, not just in military history.
Everywhere. Think about how major corporate decisions or even global political alignments are sometimes dictated not by verifiable, complex reality, but by the comforting, pre-existing beliefs that key decision makers are simply unwilling to challenge.
What other crucial moments in history, or even in current events you follow, are being dictated by this same human tendency towards self-deception?
This is something for you to mull or explore on your own.
A truly phenomenal historical hinge point, defined by psychological warfare and confirmation bias. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the lie that paralyzed the Reich. We hope you feel thoroughly well informed. We'll see you next time.